Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Digital Curbs, Users, Opportunities, and Barriers to Ongoing Curb Management. We're delighted to have you here with us on this Friday. I'm Ann Brown. I'm the Research Director for the Urbanism Next Center. And I'm going to kick us off with a few housekeeping notes about some upcoming webinars before introducing our topic and presenters and hopefully hear from them most of today. So just to hopefully this is only your first of our upcoming webinars here at Urbanism Next. We have 2 more webinars coming up this spring. In March, we have a webinar titled Shifting Spaces, Understand the Impacts of AVs on Land Use. And then in April, we're having a webinar on shared mobility regulations, thinking about balancing policy goals with operating costs. So you can scan this QR code to stay tuned and register online when those registrations are live and the dates are confirmed, but we'll also be sharing those via email. So stay tuned for those upcoming events. But today, and why you're all here, is we're talking about digital curbs, users' opportunities, and barriers to ongoing curb management. So a quick just framing of this issue before I, again, introduce our speakers. Cities have been working to manage curbs for the past, well, for all time, but in the past decade especially, there's been a real turn towards both a policy approach. So here's an example of San Francisco thinking about how to prioritize curb space by land uses. Other examples, Seattle, for example, did this as well. New York City have a whole bunch of these curb hierarchies and thinking about how do we as cities align our curbs with policy and how can we really use them to maximize our policy goals. Now, in more recent years, we've been thinking about the digital side of this, and there was a large SMART Grants Program effort over the past several years, sponsored by the federal government, a coalition of cities across the US all testing out curb management strategies more from a digital perspective, as well as the launch of a curb data specification, so a standardized curb measurement system that can be used across cities. So we've moved from this kind of policy-oriented approach to then really think about how to integrate technologies into curb management. And that leads us into today, which is thinking about curbs as this digital infrastructure in addition to a physical one. And this webinar, we're hoping to address a few questions. So specifically, who are the users, both internal and external to cities who use our curbs? What are the barriers to creating and adopting and maintaining digital curb infrastructure? And luckily for us, we have 3 experts with us here today to answer those questions. First, we have Sam Brenner, a transportation technology strategist with the city of Boston. Sam launched Boston's Curb Lab and leads their nationally recognized innovation efforts, in addition to directing the city's U.S. Department of Transportation SMART Grant Investments and Technology Implementations. Sam's work at Boston has been widely recognized for its use of open source technology and data standards, allowing other cities to benefit from the city's work. Sam holds a master's degree in public policy from Northeastern University. Up next, we'll have Nico Larco, professor of architecture and design at the University of Oregon and the director of the Urbanism Next Center. Professor Larco researches sustainable urban design, has developed sustainable urban design framework, and assists with projects in how to best apply principles and approaches. He also researches sustainable urban design and associated topics. Last but not least, we have Robert Binder rounding out our panel. Robert is a senior research affiliate with Urbanism Next and a visiting associate professor at the University of Oregon. Dr. Binder researches topics of transportation equity and justice on public space theory. He holds a Master of City and Regional Planning from Georgia Tech and a PhD in urban planning from the University of Southern California. So with that, I'm gonna turn things over to Sam. I do encourage you all to drop questions you have in the Q&A throughout the webinar. After our 3 presenters wrap up, I'll kick us off with a few moderator questions and then open it up to the Q&A and field some of those questions as well. So as we have our presenters moving through their presentations, again, feel free to drop those questions you have in the Q&A. Okay, Sam, I'm gonna turn it over to you. And Sam, you're muted.
Thank you, Ann. Appreciate the intro. Happy to be here. And yeah, so today I'll be talking about Boston's efforts to implement CDS. CDS is the data standard that was established by the Open Mobility Foundation, which did this incredible thing of taxonomizing all of the things that could possibly happen at a curb. Just the taxonomy itself is no small feat. A little bit about me before I dive into it. I work in the Office of Emerging Technology. Our office exists because the city really had the idea that we could be leveraging AI and new sensor technology, better software practices to make things better around the city. And I highlight that because I don't sit in the transportation department or the planning department. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've been able to get this work off the ground is from the beginning, we realized that this was very much a cross-departmental effort. And I've been really fortunate to be positioned organizationally in a place where I have the opportunity to work across different departments. So yeah, I'll just jump over here to start. I wanted to set the context on the types of problems that Boston's trying to answer. So one thing that
Sam, we're not seeing your shared screen if you were sharing it.
All right. Here we go. A curb slide now.
There we go. That's working.
Good.
Great. All right. This is slide 1, so you haven't missed much. So, all right. So one thing that I think is also worth framing is in Boston, curb regulations and operations are super closely tied to the policymakers. So in a lot of cities, they will take a lot of the operational work of curbs of managing parking meters, enforcement, towing, and they'll often put that in a pretty autonomous department, sometimes even its own autonomous agency. In Boston, all of our curb operations are, the people that are running curb operations are in the same teams as the people making curb policy. So for Boston, a lot of the decisions we're making start with policy decisions, and those policy decisions really come down to trade-offs between movement and access. So, it would be great if everybody could park right next to their destination, but there's just not enough space for that. It would be great if we could dedicate more lanes. I don't know if it would be great, but when you have limited space, you need to choose. Do we want to make it easier for people to move around, or do we want to make it easier to get from their vehicle or their bike to their final destination? And in order to answer these policy questions well, you really need to have data. And in our case, we didn't. So at the start of this project, the real source of truth for what our curbs looked like was the signs at the curbs themselves. And everything that we've been investing in is really around just taking that information and making it accessible so that policymakers can actually understand what the trade-offs are that they're making. Some typical kind of trade-off questions that you'll hear in curb management meetings around the city are things like, where do we put the temporary bus stop? It's great to, we want people riding on the bus, but this temporary bus stop is going to make it harder to get into the businesses in this neighborhood. How many construction or moving permits should we issue? We want to build things. We want people to move into houses, but we can't put those things everywhere. And if a whole block is shut down for construction, that has really significant impacts on the neighborhood. Similarly, bike lanes, making decisions about different modalities. Those are trade-offs. Bike lanes, as Boston has been developing them, have had a really significant impact on parking capacity in the city. So again, to make those trade-offs well, step 1 is just understanding what is the curb, how much space do we have, and that's been a hard thing to do, and we're hoping to make some progress there. So Nico and team, we'll go into details on this. I'll just say that as we've built the technology that we've built, it's we've tried to simplify things and really make sure that we're focused on our core users. And for like the purposes of building the tech, we've broken it down into 4 categories. So the first is the operator, just, where are the things that I care about? Like moving permits is a great example. Like if I'm giving out a moving permit today, am I giving it out in a space where I've already given out a moving permit? Those are things that are hard to answer today. You have the policymaker that is really interested in achieving the city's desired policy outcomes, but in order to do that, needs to make informed trade-offs about mobility and access. You have the planners, also very invested in the city's policy outcomes, but thinking about it on a different timescale. So not necessarily how do we make this neighborhood more accessible or, reduce congestion in this particular neighborhood. Planners are thinking about, in a longer time scale, like what happens when we make all of these different changes and how do they coalesce into what the city looks like 30 years from now. That like temporal component really changes the way that you have to structure the data and the way that you need to like develop tools to give access to that data. And then the last is the engineer. So at the end of every curb decision, there's often an engineering project involved with it. The engineers are also thinking about all the same questions as the personas above, but in order to really help the engineers, you need super precise geographic data. Like they are thinking about, in terms of linear feet, sometimes down to the inch. So we hope we get to a future world where like engineers don't have to go out with measuring tapes and like actually measure the curb every time they do stuff. So next few slides are really just focused around what are the core pieces of technology that we're building to actually solve these problems and help the city answer their questions. The really like core piece of tech that we've been building, and the thing that I think we've invested most in, is our system to actually like create the curb database. You can think about the curb database. It's just like the digital map of where everything lives and where all the policies are. There's 3 major components of it. The first is the curb geometry tool. So it takes a map of the city, all the city's block faces. It looks at things like fire hydrants, sign locations, curb cuts, and then breaks those block faces up into curb segments. Those curb segments will then be used down the road to like attach to policies and turn into curb zones. In addition to creating the curb segments, you also need to understand what are the policies that are attached to the segment. So we're leveraging AI to really just read the signs and take the information on the signs and structure it into the CDS format that we've talked about. And then the last piece of technology, again, also powered with AI, is going through the logic of, given this length of curb and these signs that are around it, what are the policies that apply to this particular segment? And so when you have our asset data that flows through this process, at the end of it, you have a map of the curb, you have all of the segments, but you also have the policies that are attached to those segments in a way that you can query them in a lot of different ways. I think one of the really significant things about CDS is like, it's not flat data, it's nested data. So it makes it really, really configurable to a whole bunch of different use cases and questions that are being asked. Just to help visualize it, our curb geometry tool, just imagine, the line in the middle, that's the block face. All the dots are the sign locations, and it is taking the block face and just breaking that curb up into the various curb zones along that block face. Similarly, visual example of our policy tool here. The tool can identify a sign from an image and then takes that and structures that into that policy into CDS format. And then last thing is the assignment tool. Once you have the curb zones and you have the policies, the policy assignment tool is the logic that connects those two things. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is just some of the really core investments that we're making to actually use the data. So the first is our curb management platform. We're working with a company called Curb IQ. I think one of the things that's significant about our project is this is the first time that Curb IQ has ever worked with a city where they didn't go out and create the data for the city. We are giving Curb IQ, we built an API and we gave Curb IQ a link to our API, and that day we had access to their platform and data flowing. That gives the city a lot of leverage in terms of the vendors that we work with, but also because it really reduces the amount of effort that goes into the implementation, and that's effort that we can spend making the data more accurate. One of our hypotheses as we've worked through this is that at the end of the day, no outside vendor is going to be able to do a better job creating an accurate data set for the city, because the city is the one that is putting up signs and taking them down. We're always going to be the first person to know when there's a curb change, and we've made a lot of investments into digitizing our asset management. And so now that we've made those asset management decisions digitized, we're now taking advantage of that to have a real-time data set of everything that's happening on our curb. And yeah, now we can put it into a platform. This platform is for internal city stakeholders that need to make curb management decisions. They can create different scenarios. They can see what happens when you change policies. They can manage curb changes. So anytime you need to change a curb in the city, you have to talk to many different people in many different departments. This centralizes all of that communication and also allows us to see for the first time all of the upcoming plan changes. That's been a huge friction point where you have many different departments doing many different curb changes at the same time. There's never been a place to actually see that or map that visually. And then the other thing that we are investing in now that we have a curb data set is a public curb map. So one thing that we've realized is curb data is very difficult for the city. It's also very difficult for residents. We've interviewed a ton of residents, and one of the major themes is that they feel like the city is out to get them. They don't feel like the city is trying to help them navigate and access the things that they need. So we see the public map almost as an experiment to see if we can change public perception about the curb. And let me stop sharing and then share this other screen here. So this is a map that we designed after many dozens and dozens of resident interviews and playing around with other curb maps that we've seen. I think the biggest thing for us is curb data is incredible. Like I mentioned before, it's nested data. It's incredibly complex. It means that in order to get someone the information that they like or that they need, it is a really tough information design challenge. So we're trying to design something that makes it really easy for residents to get the information that they need. This is kind of the first iteration, but we're excited to, change the way people see the curb. We're doing things like being really deliberate about showing parking garages. we're showing blue bike locations. In future iterations, we'll have additional transit information. Users can click onto a curb space and see the policies that apply to that space. We've added filters to make it really easy to find accessible parking locations. We want to make it really easy to find loading zones. The coloring is not great here, but if you squint, you can see that if you click this filter, you can now see resident-only spots. And we plan on continuing to work on this tool and make it something that can be used for a lot of different things. The idea is maybe a year from now, we have one map that is specific to snow emergency parking, and we have a different map for street cleaning. But at the end of the day, they all share the same design patterns that we've developed because we have a lot of confidence that this makes it easy for people to reference that data. So yeah, those are the three big technology investments for us, like creating the data, absolutely number one. If it's not comprehensive and accurate, no one will use anything. But once we have that, we have a curb management platform that we're really excited about. And then again, we're really excited about experimenting with new ways to help people navigate accessibility and mobility challenges in the city. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Sam. We'll have Nico transition here.
Yep. I'm going to take over from here. Let me share my screen. All right. Can you all see that?
Looks good.
Yeah, great. Okay. Great presentation, Sam. So good to see the latest iteration of those things as well. So Urbanism Next we were really excited to be partnering with the city of Boston on this SMART grant. Whereas, a big push was to create this this technical methodology for creating the digitized curbs. Part of the grant was also to figure out how best we could use it and what it might be used for, who might be using it, what also might affect what kind of formats the information would be put together. And so we were really excited to, especially in a space where there's oftentimes technology for the sake of technology, we were thrilled that both Boston and the SMART Grants Program were really interested in, okay, well, let's take a minute to really think about how it is that this is being used and how we can best create something that's going to be used most extensively. So really trying to understand, as I said, who the end users are, how they could use that, and figuring out what might underlying opportunities and barriers might be to this. It's very easy to imagine lots of things that you can do with digital curb data. We want to figure out what might be low-hanging fruit, feasible, and a phrase that we use a lot, making sure that the juice is worth the squeeze. So we did this by first talking to a lot of different people. We did literature review on all these topics, and then we talked to a lot of different people within the city of Boston proper in terms of the governance. We talked to external stakeholders, community groups, agencies, and city governments outside of the Boston area who were also doing interesting things with digital curbs, and then a whole lot of people in industry, people who really work with curb data, to delivery companies, ride-hail companies, AV companies, these types of things. So the main thing that we're trying to figure out is who are the users and how are they going to use it? And we really organize it into these four main categories: city staff and operations, people within the city, residents, delivery drivers and service vehicles, which we talk a lot about the benefits that could be happening with those groups, and then third-party curb data providers. So I'm going to go through each one of these just quickly. So for city staff and operations, I think actually the map that Sam showed already shows some of the fantastic uses of this. It might not be a surprise to many of you, but there's many cities that do not have a single source of truth for what their curb regulations are. And in fact, in the city of Boston itself, up until recently, if there is something if someone comes in with a complaint about what happened, a ticket they got or something, there's nowhere that you can verify that, or there used to be nowhere that you could verify that. You had to send someone out into the field to look at the signs to figure out what was happening at that curb. That is not strange for cities across the country. So having really a huge need to have a single source of truth on what the regulations are. And something also a lot of interest is something that would track over time. So that's really helpful for the policymaking, for planning, and for public engagement, right? So being able to do all those things. Really useful for enforcement and compliance to make sure things are happening that should be happening, and people are being ticketed and correctly or being asked to do things correctly. Lots of interest in figuring out where there might need to be changes to this. You need the single source of truth. And then also for asset management and operations, Sam already talked a little bit about that. As he mentioned, the city is the one who puts up the signs, and so they have a sense of where what's changing, the curb asset itself, how that's changing, and so having a tool to help them do that is really important. In terms of residents, it starts to be a little bit more limited. On the one hand, there's all these things that we can think about residents using curb data for, but the interface of how they get to that and the friction, we'll say, of actually using it limits it a bit. So understanding local regulations, I think, and the tool that Sam just showed is a fantastic example of that, is excellent. A lot of people wanted to understand that. Just where in my neighborhood can I park? Or, I saw someone that was parked there. Was that supposed to happen? Lots of people really interested in using it to figure out what's happening in the city, so that they could, as they engage with the planning process, they could advocate for changes that they were interested in. Lots of interest in contesting parking tickets. So if they were getting a ticket, being able to go back and say, well, this is what your regulations say. Advocating for change, as I talked about. One topic that came up a lot, I'll say, in literature and talking to people who are really trying to push the frontiers of what we do with curb data, is really this idea of being able to navigate to your parking location, knowing what's available when. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but there's a ton of limitations to making that kind of real-time piece work. On the one hand, it is getting the information, gathering the information, but on the other hand is people aren't going to go to a city website to figure out how to park, where to park as they're driving into the city. That's typically, if you can integrate it with something like Google Maps or Apple Maps or something like that, that might make more sense. But right now, assuming that there's going to be another source of knowledge for that is difficult, in terms of the way people are using this information. There's a lot of discussion about how delivery drivers and service vehicles can be benefiting from this, specifically loading zones, things like this. And this was really interesting as we talked to a number of different companies about this, of how they're using it and what that might be useful. So first of all, it's important to understand that there really is a large variety within this category of users. Large companies versus medium or small size companies really do things a lot different. There's a lot of the deliveries that you're seeing in the city are actually happening through mid and small size companies. These are people who are, for instance, one of the people we talked to delivering, we call it kegs, right? This is not an enormous delivery company. This is they just do this one thing, and they're doing it mostly on paper. They're not. There's no digital interface that they've got. Also really different national versus local companies. National companies have interest in workflows that are going to be able to be modified throughout their entire offerings. So one of the things that we heard a whole lot of time is if there's one, if Boston has this fantastic digitized curb, and let's say it's works updated quickly and correct and all this, the answers from these large companies was, that's great. Give me another like 30 or 40 cities with the same amount, the same format, and with the same reliability, and we'll maybe think about changing our protocols or our workflows. Local companies might be a better target for those types of uses, but again, many of the local companies are smaller and are not really using digital data or digital interfaces to figure out their deliveries. Also, a big difference between professional versus gig drivers. Professional drivers are doing this every day, know their area tremendously well, and even some of the large delivery companies that we talk to, the national delivery package delivery companies, rely a lot on the professional expertise of their drivers. So they tell them these are the things you need to do, and let the drivers figure out how to navigate within the streets, the curbs, and also the order of deliveries. So even some of these large companies, which you would guess are much more digitized and are doing route planning and all this, are not necessarily doing that. That's very different from gig drivers, which are absolutely using apps all the time to figure out where they're going and what they're doing. So really different worlds. And then finally, another large variety here is just dwell times. Someone who's delivering a package, which is what's often talked about in the literature of, someone coming in more or less gig delivery type package things. Those are pretty small dwell times. Goods could be a lot larger, right? You're delivering a whole series of pallets in an area versus service vehicles, which actually might be longer time because they're going to be coming back and forth to their truck to get more tools or do these types of things. So these are really different varieties. These companies are interested in understanding regulations, similar to what the residents are doing. Like the map that Sam showed could be really helpful for that. They want to know where the loading zones are and have a sense of that. That is not information that they need to access every day all the time. They just need to understand it once, get the lay of the land. A lot of the experience is actually, and the guiding is happening through the drivers themselves, and then being able to run with it kind of in real time in person. Again, big difference with gig drivers who are really using the digital data and digital interface all the time. There's a lot of conversation as well about this idea of being able to reserve loading spaces, and it seems glorious, the idea that you could be, as you're going to your next destination, making sure that there's a loading spot, reserving it, being able to pull in there right next where you need to be, and moving on. A lot of barriers to that, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit, just a moment. And lastly, there's these third-party curb data providers. These are places like INRIX or CurbIQ, Automotus. And they're interested, they collect this data, create this data, and actually sell it to a bunch of different users. So having a city put it together, a public entity to put it together, they're somewhat interested, but they need, again, they're large businesses that are doing work across countries, sometimes internationally, and they need to make sure that whatever system's coming in is something that they can trust now and for the future, and that has a way of working that an interface that can be easy and seamless within a bunch of different places. Okay, so unfortunately, there are some significant barriers to digital curb data use, there's a lot of hopes of what this can do, but there are some real barriers that I think we need to address. And again, going back to that question of, is the juice worth the squeeze? First one is simply accuracy and reliability. Without that, nobody's going to trust it and nobody's going to integrate it into their workflows. So sometimes GPS accuracy and geolocation can be a limitation for some. A real question is just the ongoing maintenance and how quickly you're getting information updated. Data standardization is really important for any of the larger companies, making sure that this is similar everywhere so that you can come up with processes that will work the same everywhere and you don't have to reinvent this. Integration is really a large barrier, so making sure that the data standardization works. CDS, as Sam mentioned, is actually a way that could go forward with this. It is still in its early adoption phase, we'll say. And so something that still needs to get developed, but this would go a long way in helping these things happen. As I mentioned before, the accuracy and reliability is important. The reliability over time is important. So maintaining that curb data is critical, and the speed at which it needs to be updated changes depending on the use. So we talked to some ride-hailing and AV companies, and they said they need their updates. They need the digital data to be updated as soon as the sign goes up, because that's when they're liable. That's when they need to start making decisions. As opposed to planners who said, every few months, if it's updated, that's close enough, we can work with it. So that's something to really think about. The other thing about is the creating part of this. It takes time and money to do this the first time. Gets into our next part. Creating the digital curbs can be costly and complicated. A lot of the work that Sam's and his team have done have hopefully helped make that a lot easier. But this can be expensive to create. But then the data integration part can be really complicated. Convincing a large company to integrate your curb data into their workflows, it is there's a lot of time and money and energy and just like headspace that needs to happen to do this. So it has to be at a scale that's going to be of interest to these companies. So not just one city, not even just a few cities. It has to be a large range of cities. I don't know what the number is right now. And there has to be promise that this data is going to exist for a long time, which sometimes is difficult to guarantee in the public sector. So things to consider. As I mentioned, one of the barriers as well is just limited use of digital data. Not everyone is using digital data. Small and mid-sized delivery companies are often not. Service companies are often not using this data. One of the large delivery companies that I mentioned really relies on the expertise of their drivers. When we spoke to them, they were just piloting a project where they were using much more route kind of centralized, digitized route planning for their drivers. But they feel the professional drivers have tremendous amount of expertise and insights, and rely on them for figuring out routing and how to best use the curbs and where to park and all that. Very different for gig workers, as I mentioned. The last really big barrier, and we heard this time and again from everyone that we spoke to, is just the challenge of overcoming the inertia, reluctance to change. And this, what I want to say though, is that this isn't people just don't want to change. It's that these are complicated systems, and people over decades in different departments within the cities have figured out ways of making the systems that they have work for them. Cobbled together where funding was available, creating ways of making it work. And so the idea of shifting it to one organized digital curb is, on the one hand, fantastic, but on the other hand, is asking people to take all those systems that they've developed over time and switch over. And this is not to say that it's impossible or it shouldn't happen at all. I think there's good reason to do it, but there's a lot of reluctance to do that, and to have faith that the new thing is going to work as well as the thing that has happened that's been built over time. One of the things that we continually, there was a lot of literature about this, and there's a lot of, if you read and talk to people who are doing things in innovation in the curb space, there's a lot of talk about real-time data. Tons of fantastic opportunities with this in terms of being able to know how the curb is being used at one time or another, or changing. A lot of people talk about the ability to change the curb regulations over time, depending on if there's more or less congestion, all these types of things. But we found there's very large barriers to this part. It is first, and we saw this in a lot of the SMART grant projects around the country from USDOT, it is really costly to implement. The sensors are expensive, maintaining them is expensive, the technology generally is expensive, the workflows are difficult to maintain, and covering all the pilots that have happened are a block or a few blocks. Imagining that would happen over an entire neighborhood, much less an entire city, is a huge feat and a huge cost. Again, we get to is the juice worth the squeeze question. The other thing is that some of the like real-time data, you don't need that everywhere in your city. You only need it in areas where there's really high curb use and a lot of conflicts. In a quiet residential street, we don't need to know who's parking there at any specific time, and if there's a space available. There's probably going to be a space available. So trying to figure out where exactly to focus this if you were ever to do it. It has to be trustworthy always, and this is where as soon as you start losing that amount of reliability of is that real-time data correct, then it really quickly deteriorates into, well, then we're just going to start using other methods of what we're perceiving as we're driving through here instead of relying on the digital side. It needs to be integrated into the end user workflows. For instance, this idea that someone is going to reserve a spot as they're driving somewhere. Some of the delivery companies that we talked to said, like, absolutely not. The last thing we want is one of our drivers, spending time touching things on a screen to figure out where they're going to be parking. Like, they should be paying attention to the road and making sure that we don't have crashes or anything like that. And relatedly, even if you were to have real-time data and you were able to do reservations, The biggest barriers, or a big barrier, is actually enforcement. So if let's say you reserve a space and you get there 2 minutes later and now there's someone in it, typically from a lot of the literature we looked at and a lot of the people we talked to, those are oftentimes not other delivery drivers, but they're cars that are parked in places that they shouldn't be. And if you don't have that enforcement, all this technology, all this integration really is for naught. Okay, that said, there are fantastic things that the digital curbs can give, and in our mind, like where really the attention should be put and the effort should be put. The first, and cannot emphasize this enough, I think with the things that Sam was showing, you can already see the benefits of that. And as we talk to cities across the country, there was a resonating like yes to this. Just creating a single source of digital regulation truth is tremendously helpful. Having one place that you have that you understand everything that is happening, everything that exists at the moment, not having to send people out to confirm is that really what the zone is, or in a planning meeting trying to figure out like what exists right now. Having that single source of truth is a fantastic resource. That is, I'm not going to say it's super easy, but it's a lot easier than some of the other things that we've talked about. It has to be straightforward. It has to track changes over time. So a lot of the cities that are doing this, creating this digital single source of truth, are actually integrating their workflows with their sign shop, for instance, to make sure that when a new sign goes up, it automatically goes into the database. So really good ways of doing that. So yeah, it has to be kept up to date. Integrating it where possible and where it works best into existing systems and workflows can be fantastic. And there, as I mentioned, everyone has all these different departments and different uses of the curb and different needs of the curb, have systems they've developed over time. Creating the system, maintaining, keeping it updated, and offering it really has the opportunity over time to have people start shifting over to this single source of truth. In the end, there are tons of benefits of being able to do that. There has to be a long-term data management plan. This is complicated for cities. Oftentimes, right now, a lot of these programs are happening through specific grants that are allowing the creation of these digital maps and these digital curbs. You have to be able to manage that over time, or else all that effort and all that kind of push to shift the way we do things will be lost. So you have to have a long-term management plan that actually comes with funding associated with it. So it has to be in coordination with the city itself. Really important to have open dialogue with the end users. I can't say how valuable, like it was tremendously valuable to be talking to a whole range of different end users and what they needed from this. And it became really clear fairly quickly, some of the uses that are really, absolutely we should be doing this tomorrow, and others where you really start to see the complications of this and really have to ask what's the most efficient, best use of limited municipal dollars and time. So understanding what end users needs and making sure that you can meet those is really important. I'll say again, be really wary of any real-time data applications. I know that is a very popular thing to be doing right now, or to be talking about, and there's lots of excitement around that. I think there's a lot of challenges to it, and you really start to get to how much is the juice worth the squeeze. I personally, I find that much more difficult to make happen. And then finally, slightly related, is focus on the goals. What is the end goal of what you're trying to get to? Let's not think about technology for the sake of technology. How are digital curbs going to be helping to get to whatever it is your city, your department, your community group, your business really needs, and make sure that you're creating technology that helps you with that and doesn't create overextends how much you can be doing and how much you can be maintaining over time. Yeah, so with that, I will pass it on to Robert to talk a little bit about some of the work we did on equity.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to talk really briefly about a process that we went through following the SMART grant. We heard some things during our interviews that kind of specifically from folks out in the community stakeholders that were not part of governance or not part of planning, that had basically concerns around public trust and building trust and the need for that. So we took on this kind of separate endeavor looking at equity considerations and curb management. So really the promise around curb management is efficiency and optimization, but the challenge is, are we digitizing inequalities? That's the risk or the challenge. So we found that without an equity first approach, we risk kind of making these unfair systems faster and more efficient, or and less efficient. One of the many examples around potential blind spots when we're doing data collection, if we're looking at how LiDAR may struggle in dense obstructed environments, and I'm sure that's getting better over time with new technologies, we do have that potential of underserving neighborhoods or excluding them from data sets or never really even making it to those neighborhoods in order to do so and look at the curb. And what this does, of course, is it creates an inequitable allocation and missed investment that kind of aligns with what's been happening over time already in these areas. So one of the kind of solutions here around this specific example would be field surveys and ground truthing can shed light on those blind spots. In terms of the building trust piece that I mentioned, we have these challenges and there's these concerns that, may be unfounded around privacy and surveillance, and particularly in communities that have faced disproportionate policing and or ticketing. The success in building trust depends on these transparent enforcement practices and robust privacy policies. Cities really need to clearly communicate with the public about how curb data is collected and used for regulatory purposes, and even kind of going that furthest extent where you're actually sharing the data and making that publicly available, like Boston is doing. Another note on that front is we felt like some of these questions that come from this work could be really important moving forward as more cities and more technology companies kind of make these endeavors. So designing for inclusive access, we feel is really important. So shifting the focus from vehicle storage to community needs, and then strengthening the implementation and outcomes among the policy goals that we have, some of which would be improving access to jobs and education, adopting open data standards, CDS, and ensuring these responsive levels of communication with the public and community stakeholders and organizations. So where we were left with was this equity checklist that policymakers and planners could use in order to kind of meet the needs of these community stakeholders that we heard from. The first would be, who is missing from the inventory? It seems like a pretty simple question, but one that might be missed otherwise. 2, who can understand and access the data? 3, what risks may come with enforcement tools? 4, is input collected from all curb users? And then 5, finally, how are positive and negative externalities being distributed? So that's where I'm going to leave it. And where I think there's going to be the second report shared in the chat shortly. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert, and thanks to both Nico and Sam as well. Yes, as Robert alluded to, I'm going to drop some links in the chat right now. So this webinar really comes at the end of a collaborative partnership between the City of Boston and Urbanism Next. And so we produced some different reports related to that, dropping those in the chat for your reading. And I'm going to kick us off. I realize we have 9 minutes. I do want to highlight for some folks, there were a lot of questions, especially as Sam was presenting around questions around costs and staffing need to implement a similar process and data collection effort as Boston, as well as how to keep those data up to date. And Sam has answered those in the chat. So not the Q&A panel, but the chat window. If you did have questions related to those, check out Sam's answers that he's already provided there. I'm going to start out with a question on my end and then open it up, and I'll field those questions and synthesize some of the ones that were posed in the Q&A and the chat. My question starts with thinking about probably one of the things we're all here, which is learning from one another, right? And how cities can really learn from one another as we continue experimenting with these technologies and often having similar goals and hopes for how we can leverage these technologies. So Sam, Boston's been part of a curb collective, for example, sharing lessons, working with the Open Mobility Foundation, thinking about that curb data specification, and then sharing what's worked well, what hasn't, et cetera. And I was curious if you could just talk a little bit about that experience, and especially thinking about scalable learnings from either that type of model or how you would recommend cities do continue to learn from one another, whether it be curb management or even beyond, and just reflecting a little on that process, since we all don't want to reinvent the wheel, we want to learn from one another.
Yeah. Yeah, super excited we're calling out the Curb Collaborative, because that was definitely a huge part of us being able to do what we've been able to do. I think one of the surprising values of it was, like, in so many government things, procurement becomes such a blocker. And particularly in technology and like working across departments, like procurement can just get very difficult. We're not competing against each other. It's not like private industry. We could all share notes on procurement, and we didn't participate, but there was actually a joint purchasing agreement. I think it was facilitated by the Open Mobility Foundation that made it very straightforward for cities to just like find the technology solutions that they needed and like go through that joint purchasing agreement. So that just, I think, helping us navigate like the logistics of procurement was huge. And then I think like one of the things that made it really, I think, one, we had the opportunity to meet in person and actually like forming connections and like being on a first name basis with people in other cities, and like every time you have a problem, just emailing them right away. I don't know. I think being in person makes it much easier to start having those emails. But yeah, and then I'd say the last thing too is, there were, I don't know, a dozen plus cities all doing slightly different things, all experiencing slightly different pain points. It's just a really great way to like de-risk some of the things that you're doing, because other cities take on those risks before you. Yeah, great experience. We really appreciate the Open Mobility Foundation leading that.
If I can just make one quick point. So we are part of the Open Mobility Foundation collaborative, but also before that, one on self-driving vehicles with Citify and the Knight Foundation. And in both of them, I don't know why we don't do this everywhere. It is so useful to be able to compare notes, figure out what works, bounce ideas off each other. As Sam was saying, de-risking. We help push the SMART Grants Program to have a kind of collective option. And I'm hoping that we see that much more in future grant opportunities. It is really a great way to make sure that the learning goes beyond just one city.
Thanks to you both. And pulling from a few different questions in the chat, I was curious if you, on this synthesizes across presentations, so whoever wants to jump in, feel free. But it's really this question of moving from this mapping and collecting the data to thinking about aligning with city goals. So how do we take those mapped assets, which themselves are a challenge to keep up to date, and that's its own Herculean effort and its own. But how do we then take those data to understand both how curbs are used, inform policy, potentially do things like evaluating how we use one curb, how curbs are used in one place versus another, or the trade-offs between them, or potentially doing some scenario analyses. Curious what you all think about that.
Sam, do you want to start with that, or you want?
Sure. I think one thing that's helped us a lot in our project is like we put the policy outcomes like front and center. So there's so many different types of curb data. There's so many different areas that we could care about. It can be really easy to boil the ocean, just try to do everything at once. If you put the policy objectives front and center, then you can say, okay, here's the outcome that we want. Let's say it's reduce congestion. All right, what are the things that we need to like measure, understand in order to reduce congestion? That's, I don't know, double parking, circling, occupancy rates. Okay, so those are the things we need. What are the areas with congestion? All right, it's Chinatown, it's Back Bay, it's these specific neighborhoods. That helps us like narrow down what we actually need to focus on. So when we're building our map, like we're not, validating the entire city at once. We're just picking the project that has a policy outcome that we're shooting for, and we know exactly what we need to validate. So it just makes the problem much smaller.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like what you just mentioned, not boiling the ocean. You don't need all the data for everywhere about everything, right? Figure out what your goals are and what's the specific data that you need. It takes time and money to put these things together and time and money to maintain them. Figure out the parts that you need and then just use that to get to the answers. And, again, all this stuff that I think some of the questions as well that are in the chat, the doors, like the floodgates are open once you have this single source of truth. And so that is like an important first step. And we're seeing more and more cities starting to do that. It takes work to get it going, as Sam mentioned as well. Like if you have good systems internally, the maintenance doesn't have to be tremendously complicated. Minneapolis is doing something similar with that as well. But you need that first single source of truth so that you can actually do it. So, I think that is a great low-hanging fruit that all cities should be striving for, and then all these opportunities to build on that.
Yeah, and I would just add that there were, from some of the stakeholders that we spoke to, even within the community itself, like there was a level of excitement around it too. And so like, regardless of what the policy goals are, these outside organizations were also like, yeah, come here, let's talk about how we can do this in our business community and things like that. So just to add there.
Thanks all. We're at our final minute, so I'm going to take our final minute to echo both. Just think about the exciting opportunities for curb data, and from all the different stakeholders we heard from across the city, and how valuable the digitized curbs can be from the inventory, and then really thinking beyond as well on the next steps that this resource and data can be for achieving a whole wide variety of city goals. So big thanks to our speakers, Sam, you and your team for putting this all together and providing really critical lessons and understanding for other cities and all of us. And thanks, Nico and Robert, for sharing those research perspectives. And for our audience, we will have a recording of this event, so feel free to rewatch, share, and then, of course, the reports again in the link. And I want to thank you all again for joining us on this Friday, and wishing you all a happy weekend. Thanks, all.
Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Nico.
Thank you.
Bye, all.